I won $1.6 million in the lottery, but I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I created a fake crisis, pretending I lost my job and needed help with bills, just to see who in my family would actually step up. Some ignored me, others gave excuses, but Aunt Grace was the only one who truly helped without hesitation. That test revealed the real nature of my relationships and taught me who I could really count on. In the end, winning the money wasn't about the cash, it was about finding peace and choosing who deserved to be in my life. The morning started off just like any other, alarm buzzing at 6:30 a.m., coffee machine humming on autopilot, and a quick peek at my budgeting app before I rushed out to work. My apartment, a modest little one-bedroom, wasn't much to brag about, but it was mine and that meant something. Rent swallowed a big chunk of my paycheck each month, and whatever was left got divided up between utilities, groceries, and that tiny emergency fund I was constantly trying to build up. I'd gotten used to making every dollar stretch until it nearly disappeared by the time I clocked out for the day. My birthday had basically become just another drawn-out Tuesday, nothing special. Still, I made my usual stop at the gas station on the corner, like I did every Friday, to grab my weekly lottery ticket. Normally, I'd spend $15. That was my small indulgence, my harmless little protest against the constant grind of adult life. But that day, I slid a $25 bill across the counter. Birthday treat, I told the clerk with a half laugh and maybe just a sliver of real hope. He smiled, printed out the tickets, and told me good luck. Later that night, I ended up celebrating by myself with leftover Thai food and a glass of boxed wine, the TV murmuring in the background while I absent-mindedly scrolled through social media. I skimmed through photos of people I knew dressed up in nicer outfits, dining at swankier places, living what always looked like a slightly shinier version of life than mine. Sometime around 8:45, I remembered the lottery tickets I'd tossed on the kitchen counter. I pulled them closer and opened the lottery website on my phone. First number matched. Then the second. My heart skipped at the third. By the time all six lined up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. $1.6 million. After taxes. More than I could have dreamed of making in a decade of working. I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for some wave of joy to crash over me, but it never came. Instead, I felt a cold, uneasy weight settle in my chest. I'd read plenty of stories about people who hit the jackpot and watched their lives unravel under the pressure of everyone else's expectations. In my family, money had a way of being remembered, especially when it didn't belong to them. I could already picture the whispers, the phone calls, the casual conversations that somehow always looped back to what I could do for them. I closed the browser, folded the ticket with care, and tucked it deep inside the drawer of my desk. I wasn't about to tell anyone, not my parents, not my siblings, not even my closest friend. Not now. Maybe not ever. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely clear-headed. The money was mine, sure, but keeping it that way? That would be the real test. And for that, I needed to stay sharp and remember exactly who I was dealing with. I didn't have to think long to remind myself why I couldn't share the news. My family had been rewriting their financial history on the backs of my paychecks for years, and somehow, my name always ended up in the from line. Like when my mom, Claire, called 4 years ago about the roof leaking in her son's room. She needed just a little temporary help, she said, promised to pay it back as soon as Jack, her husband, closed a deal on some property. I wired her $3,200 that same day. A month later, instead of repayment, I got pictures of them grinning during a weekend getaway to Napa. She never brought up the roof, or the money again. My older brother, Chase, was even worse. His requests always came wrapped in panic, urgent bills, busted cars, sudden medical emergencies. I'd send what I could, sometimes even draining my savings, only to see him living it up at music festivals or lounging on some beach in photos online. The one time I called him out, he brushed it off with a laugh, told me I worried too much. Then there was Ava, my younger sister, who made her move during wedding season. She promised she'd pay back the $2,500 I put on my credit card for her caterer and florist as soon as the thank you cards went out. That was 6 years ago. The debt's still there, along with a rotating list of reasons: kids, the mortgage, surprise expenses. In that sea of broken IOUs, Aunt Grace was the only one who stood apart. She lived simply in a tiny bungalow, drove a car older than me, and picked up extra hours at the school just to make ends meet. But somehow, she always found a way to help. She'd slip me a $25 if she heard my car needed an oil change, or drop off casseroles when she knew I was buried in work. Her help wasn't flashy, never came with strings, but it was always real, always heartfelt. As I sat there staring at that winning lottery ticket, neatly tucked away in my desk drawer, a parade of old memories played out clearly in my mind, each one reminding me who I could actually count on, and who would just see me as a walking solution to all their problems. That realization made one thing clear: my next step had to be thoughtful and calculated. 2 days after finding out I'd won, I drove up to Portland to meet a financial advisor I'd been referred to through a chain of people who valued discretion above everything else. His office was high up in one of those downtown towers where the floors shine like mirrors and everyone speaks like they're in a library. Jameson Garrison shook my hand with just the right balance of warmth and distance. Once we were alone and the door was shut, I slid the ticket across his polished desk. He glanced at the numbers, eyebrows rising just slightly before his face returned to that smooth, unreadable professionalism. For the next 2 hours, we had a quiet but focused conversation. He walked me through how a revocable trust could be used to claim the prize on my behalf, making sure my name stayed off the public radar entirely. We built a plan that spread the money across different accounts, mostly conservative investments for slow and steady growth, and we carved out a smaller account I could dip into for daily expenses without raising suspicion. When I asked him what the biggest mistake lottery winners made, he didn't hesitate. The fastest way to lose your peace, he said, is to tell the wrong person. And once you do, you can't undo it. People treat you differently, even if they think they're not. I nodded, and the truth of that landed in my gut like a stone. Staying quiet wasn't just about guarding the money, it was about keeping my sense of self intact. When I left his office, I had a thick folder full of documents, a plan mapped out down to the week, and a checklist of next steps. That ticket wasn't just a slip of paper anymore, it had become a legal entity, secure and shielded. On the drive back home, I realized that nothing on the outside of my life could change. Not yet. I'd still be showing up at the office each morning, still clipping grocery coupons, still driving my old beat-up Corolla with the dent in the side. The win was real, but until I knew exactly who I was dealing with, it had to stay completely invisible. And to do that, I needed to find a way to see my family clearly, without money muddying the lens. The more I sat with it, the more I realized that I didn't just want to keep the secret. I wanted evidence. Proof of who would show up when there was nothing to gain. That's when the idea crept in, quiet at first, but soon it wouldn't let go. I'd create a fake crisis and watch who stepped forward. I landed on $4,800, enough to feel like a real ask, enough to make them think, but not so much that it felt completely out of reach for the ones who always said they loved me. The story I came up with was simple and believable. My company had suddenly gone under after losing its biggest client, the severance package was delayed, and I was slammed with recent medical bills that wiped out my savings. I just needed help covering rent and bills until I could land on my feet. As soon as I shaped the plan in my head, doubts started creeping in. Was this manipulative? Was I setting them up to fail? I reminded myself that it wasn't about catching anyone in a lie, it was about protecting myself. If they couldn't show up when I was broke, how could I trust them to handle the truth if they knew I had millions? I started putting it all together like a script. I even researched real company closures to make my story sound legitimate. I practiced sounding tired, but not pitiful, just enough to leave room for choice without laying on the guilt. I didn't want to pressure them. I wanted to see who they truly were when the chips were down. Then I opened up a clean notebook and started listing names. My mother Claire, stepdad Jack, my dad Robert, his wife Lauren, my brother Chase, my sister Ava, my cousin Logan, and, of course, Aunt Grace. Next to each one, I wrote down what I honestly expected. Claire? Maybe she'd offer a little, but tell me to try someone else. Jack? A flat no. Robert? A lecture, but no help. Lauren? Also no, probably with some side-eye judgment thrown in. Chase? He'd vanish, guaranteed. Ava? Lots of sympathy, $0. Logan? He'd promise to help, then disappear. But Grace? I figured she'd give me whatever she could, even if it wasn't the full amount. Looking at that list, I felt this heavy knot in my chest. My family, boiled down to a series of anticipated disappointments. I closed the notebook and clenched my jaw. If I was really going to do this, I needed to do it fully. That meant starting the calls the very next day. I decided to begin with my mom. Claire always said she'd do anything for her kids, but over the years I'd learned that anything usually meant emotional support, not financial sacrifice. Still, she was my mother, and some part of me still wanted to believe she might come through. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful as ever. I eased into the story, telling her about the sudden closure at work, the severance delay, the medical bills piling up. She reacted right on cue, gasps, concerned little sighs, her voice turning soft and maternal. But then I said the number, $4, 800, and something in her tone shifted. Oh, honey, she said, I wish I could, but Jack and I just put the down payment on a lake house. Things are really tight right now. Maybe try your dad? Or Ava, Tyler's doing great in tech these days. The soft way my mom sidestepped the request actually hurt more than if she'd just flat out said no. I thanked her anyway, told her I'd figure something out, and ended the call. Next up was my dad. Robert's voice was clipped from the start, like he already suspected I was calling with a request. I gave him the same story: company shut down, severance delayed, medical bills mounting. I pictured his expression staying exactly the same, probably annoyed, maybe smug. When I asked for help, he immediately leaned into the role he always loved best, the lecture. Jenna, this is why I've always told you to save at least 6 months of expenses. What happened to being prepared? I tried explaining the unexpected costs again, but it didn't matter. I'd love to help, he added, but Lauren and I are focused on our retirement. You should treat this as a learning moment. And, just like that, the door closed. I was 2 for 2, and neither hit had been a surprise. Still, by the time I called my sister, I was hoping maybe, just maybe, I'd hear something different. Ava's voice was warm right away, full of sympathy when I told her what had supposedly happened. That's awful, Jenna. I can't believe they just shut down like that. For a second, I let myself believe she might actually say yes. But then came the usual pivot. We just bought the new SUV last month, and the kids' tuition is due. Plus, we're remodeling the master bath. Tyler handles our finances now, and he's super strict about the budget. But listen, why don't you come stay with us for a bit? We've got a guest room we could clear out. It'd save you rent while you look for work. It was technically an offer, but not the one I'd asked for. Moving in would have meant giving up my independence and turning into a physical reminder of how generous she was trying to be. I thanked her and said I needed to stay in the city for interviews. 3 calls in, and my predictions were proving dead on, and the space between what I'd hoped for and what I was actually getting just kept getting wider. I didn't expect much from Chase, but I still gave him the same shot I gave everyone else. First, I sent a text, just said I needed to talk. No response. That evening I called, went straight to voicemail. Tried again the next day. Still nothing. I sent another message, said it was important. Silence. By the end of the week, I gave up. He'd made his position clear without saying a word. When I got to Lauren, my stepmom, she didn't even bother with pleasantries. I barely got through the setup, job loss, bills, rent, before she cut me off. Jenna, I'm sorry, but the answer is no. You need to think about downsizing or finding a roommate. You're living above your means. I wanted to remind her that I wasn't the one posting vacation pictures or leasing new luxury cars every year, but I bit my tongue. That conversation was over before it had even started. Jack, my stepdad, didn't waste any time either. The second I finished explaining, he said, "You're not my responsibility. I've supported your mother for years, but your financial issues are yours. Maybe you should have picked a career that paid better." I didn't say another word after that. There wasn't anything left to say. Logan, my cousin, actually caught me off guard. When I called him, he sounded genuinely concerned. He offered to meet for lunch, said he'd write a check. You've always been there for me, Jenna. I've got your back. And for a brief second, I felt that tiny spark of hope. But then the morning we were supposed to meet, he texted an hour before. Something came up. Let's reschedule. We never did. After that, my calls and messages went unanswered. It was all becoming painfully obvious. The same people who'd needed my help in the past had no problem vanishing when the roles were reversed. And the ones who didn't vanish? Their refusals were dressed up in logic and moral high ground, like they were doing me a favor by keeping their money to themselves. By the time I crossed the last name off my list, the outcome looked exactly how I'd guessed. Almost. There was one person I hadn't reached out to, not because I was saving her for some dramatic final test, but because deep down, I already knew how she'd respond. Aunt Grace didn't need a story to prove who she was. 2 days after I'd finished calling everyone else, my phone lit up with her name. I hadn't contacted her yet, but her voice came through the line steady and warm. Jenna, sweetheart, I heard you've had a rough patch at work. Are you doing okay? For a second, I nearly dropped the act, nearly told her the truth. But I stuck to the script, told her about the job, the bills, the rent. She didn't push for receipts or interrogate me for details. Instead, she said, let's have lunch tomorrow. My treat. We met at her favorite little diner, the kind of place with cracked mugs and old pie under dusty glass. After we ate, she reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. I want you to take this, she said, sliding it across the table. Inside was $2,800 in clean, carefully stacked bills. My throat tightened as I looked at it. Grace, I can't take this. It's too much. But she shook her head. Nonsense. I know it's not everything you need, but it'll cover rent. And if you ever need a place to stay, my sofa pulls out. It's not fancy, but it's yours. Her voice wasn't pitying, and it didn't feel like charity. It felt like home. Like safety. As I drove home that night, Grace's envelope felt heavier than its weight in bills. It was carrying a truth I hadn't been ready to face. Out of everyone I'd asked, the one who had the least to spare had handed me nearly everything she had, no questions, no hesitation. That kind of love didn't need explaining. I slid the envelope into my bag, murmured a promise to pay her back soon, though the guilt tangled tightly with the gratitude in my chest. This wasn't just generosity, it was proof. Proof that not everyone I was related to measured love with a calculator. But it also exposed something deeper. My little test had peeled back more layers than I was prepared to deal with. The next night, I invited Grace over for tea. I'd meant to wait, but something about the way she walked in calm, trusting, carrying a tin of lemon cookies, made me realize I couldn't keep pretending, not with her. As she settled on my couch, cupping her mug with those worn, capable hands, I took a breath and said, I need to tell you something. Her brow lifted just slightly, but she stayed quiet. I didn't lose my job. None of that was true. It was a test. I wanted to see who in the family would actually show up if I needed them. And you were the only one who did. I paused, let that land, then pushed forward. 4 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $1.6 million. After taxes. You're the first person I've told. For a second, I thought she might gasp or scold me or laugh, but she just sipped her tea. Her eyes softened, and she said, I get why you did it. But I'm sad you felt like you had to. She set her cup down, leaned back like she was settling into memory. When your grandmother died, I inherited $30,000. Thought it was a blessing. Your uncle told me we should invest it in his friend's restaurant. A sure thing, he said. Less than a year later, it collapsed. Every penny gone. And when I got upset, he told me it wasn't really my money anyway, that I had no right to be angry. Her voice didn't crack, but it had the kind of steadiness that comes from surviving disappointment after disappointment. That's when I learned something. Money doesn't just show you who other people are. It shows you who you are. Her words hit me like a quiet storm, undeniable and slow-burning. She wasn't just right about them. She was right about me. This win could twist me into someone small and guarded, or give me the chance to become someone purposeful, someone generous. That night, before she left, I made a silent decision. Grace would never again worry about rent or heating bills or skipping a prescription. But I'd do it quietly, respectfully, never in a way that made her feel like she owed me anything. By the weekend, I was already taking steps. Then came Sunday. My apartment, suddenly too cramped, filled with familiar voices and unfamiliar tension. My mom and Jack shared the couch. Robert and Lauren hovered by the window. Ava perched stiffly in a dining chair. Chase lingered near the kitchen, and Logan leaned on the wall, glued to his phone. When I cleared my throat, the room hushed. "Thank you for coming," I started, keeping my voice even. I wanted to clear the air. "I'm fine. I've accepted a new job, better salary, solid benefits. I start next month." I caught the quick shift on their faces, the quiet waves of relief, like they'd all shown up bracing for another ask. But then I added, "When I thought I was in trouble, I reached out. And the way you responded told me everything I needed to know." Claire shot Jack a look before turning back to me, voice brittle. "We all have financial responsibilities, Jenna. It's not always easy to help." Robert jumped in, full lecture mode. "You can't expect others to bail you out. That's not real life." Ava twisted in her seat. "I offered you a room. That counts for something, doesn't it?" Chase didn't even look up. "I was dealing with my own stuff," he muttered. Their justifications spilled out like clockwork, predictable and practiced. But this time, I didn't nod along or smile to smooth it over. "I'm not here to argue," I said, letting the silence do the rest. "I just want you all to know, those days when I emptied my savings to cover someone else's bills? They're over. I'm not the safety net anymore." The silence that followed was so thick it felt like it had weight. No one met my eyes as they left. Most avoided saying goodbye. Only Grace stayed, helping me rinse mugs and wipe counters like nothing had changed, because between us, nothing had. A year later, everything had. I was living in a quiet, sun-warmed house with a little garden I tended barefoot every morning. Just down the block, Grace's new bungalow stood simple and sturdy, mortgage-free with extra-wide doorways for her knees and a kitchen she adored. She'd insisted on keeping things modest, and I respected that. I'd left my corporate job behind and thrown myself into the nonprofit I'd launched, an organization that helped isolated seniors with everything from companionship visits to minor home repairs. The work gave me purpose in a way that paychecks never had, and it grew faster than I expected, fueled by volunteers who shared Grace's quiet, unwavering spirit. My connection to the rest of the family stayed surface level, holiday calls, the occasional card. When real emergencies popped up, I sometimes stepped in anonymously, covered a hospital stay here, paid off a rehab balance there. They never knew the money came from me. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Because in the end, the jackpot hadn't been the money, it was the clarity. The understanding of who stood beside me without wanting anything in return. And the power to choose who stayed in my life, guilt-free. Peace, I realized, isn't something you buy, it's something you earn, one boundary at a time. That spring, Grace and I sat side by side on her porch, the sun slipping behind the trees, the air warm and still. She reached over, gave my hand a little squeeze, and said, "We did good, kiddo." I smiled at her, heart steady and full, knowing she was right. The best things I'd ever earned couldn't be measured in dollars, or anything else that fades. Don't forget to subscribe on our channel and hit that like button, it helps us make more videos for you.